In this way Britain could claim to be adhering to Chinese policy, and Jardine and Matheson replaced the British East India Company as the largest trading firm in the empire. But they were fully aware of the horrors addiction brought to China. David Matheson, a young partner, assured of nearly unlimited wealth at an early age, chose to resign, rather than to profit from the drug trade. Jardine and Matheson's early success was the result of working in close cooperation with the British East India Company. The British East India Company had a monopoly on tea, which was legal until 1833. When Britain officially agreed not to ship opium, Jardine and Matheson, headquartered in Hong Kong, provided the loophole by bringing in the drug. The British East India Company was provided with tea, but its ships did not actually carry the opium. The drug was still packaged with company seals to ensure its quality, however. Jardine and Matheson was controlled by family and Masonic relationships, and like their American counterparts they wore their family names like a badge. James Matheson, co-founder of Jardine and Matheson, had a nephew, Hugh, who would invest opium profits in mining. Hugh Matheson founded Rio Tinto Zinc Company, which is still in operation today. Alliances with the key banks Schroders and Barings provided the ability to move on a global scale. The Barings, who later were instrumental in founding the Peninsular and Oriental steamship lines, were already a force in 246 from the sacred to the profane international trade, when they began financing the opium trade. James Matheson's mother's family, the Mackays, who held the title of Earl of Inchkip, until recently controlled the board of the steamer lines. Before steam was the power of choice, opium was carried by clipper ships, which were built for speed. Two of the first opium clippers were the Alexander Baring and the Falcon. The Barings financed many American firms in various businesses, including the Binghams and Stephen Girard. Girard, like Astor, was an early pioneer of the China trade, but he was quickly eclipsed by New England merchants. The British had the early lead in the importation of opium, and were often the target of Chinese legislation and activity. This is why the British allowed American ships to enter the trade and often financed them. In this way the British were not directly breaking China's prohibition, but the British lenders and shippers would make money from their investments in the American ships. The profits of the China trade. The British families had been benefiting from the trade for a century, but the Americans caught up quickly. To the chagrin of the British, the Americans went to Turkey to buy lower-grade opium that competed with the better British-grown Indian grades. Americans proved themselves adept at smuggling, and grew wealthy from the trade. A recent book called The Wealthy 100 created a unique ranking of Americans by wealth, and the proportion of that wealth in relation to the gross national product. John Jacob Astor, born in 1763, ranked third. Stephen Girard, born in 1750, was fourth. Elias Haskett Darby, born in 1739, was number 38. Smuggler John Hancock, born in 1737, was number 54. And the not as well-known Thomas Hand Acid Perkins, born in 1764, was ranked number 78.6, while opium traders Astor and Girard ranked much higher. Thomas Perkins was even more influential, as he brought scores of American blue bloods into the trade. The Opium Brotherhood 247. The house that Perkins built. Thomas Perkins deserves credit for being one of America's first and foremost opium dealers, as well as one of the greatest drug smugglers in history. His amazing fortune places him ahead, in comparable dollars, of even the computer billionaires of the 1990s. Perkins' wealth made him a very influential man in American politics, and the power behind the Boston Brahmin class. Old reports state that the first families of Boston were from Salem, which implies they made their fortunes in shipping. What is not often understood is that these first families all made their start in the opium trade. The Appletons, Cabots, Endicotts, Hoopers, Higginsons, Jacksons, Lowells, Lawrences, Phillipses, and Saltonstalls made their money by being related to Thomas Perkins, or by riding on the coattails of the mercantile prince. Not only did these families create wealth, but also they then created industries that survived and prospered for decades to come. One industry was insurance. The Perkinses understood the value of spreading risk. They would often be financed in part by the first families of New England, who wanted their share of the area's most lucrative trade, and in part by insurance. Marine insurance is regarded as the grandfather of all modern forms of insurance in America, and it got its start in New England insuring cargo from basic commodities to slaves and opium. Connecticut was home to some of America's first insurance companies. Many have survived intact, or as parts of larger companies, though few realize their foundation was insuring the drug and slave traders in the early 19th century. Born in 1764, Thomas Perkins decided early that Harvard was not where he would seek his fortune. Instead he apprenticed with shipping merchants and his older brother, James, who was in the Santo Domingo, New England part of the Triangle trade. Thomas married Sarah Elliott, whose father was a British tobacco trader, and through his new family connections made his start in business aboard one of Elias Darby's ships. Darby was Salem's most important merchant, and the shipping 248 from the sacred to the profane business made him very rich. Today he is regarded as America's first millionaire and a trailblazer of global commerce. Darby's father started their business importing sugar from the West Indies. Because this was made illegal by Britain's restrictive trade acts, it was a fine sort of revenge that led Darby into privateering against British cargo ships during the Revolution. While many succumbed to the risks, Darby prospered. In the post-war period his ships sailed around the world, and his Grand Turk was the first New England ship to reach the Chinese port of Canton in 1785. Thomas Perkins sailed as the supercargo, the person responsible for transacting the ship's business, with the ship commanded by Captain James Magee, who was related to Darby's wife. Perkins was responsible for obtaining a good price for the cargo on board the ship. He would then take the proceeds, in whatever form, and invest them in a suitable cargo to bring home. The trade was not always direct, which made the job of the supercargo even more important. Often the supercargo would receive instructions to buy and sell in any way deemed necessary to ensure the owner's profit. On slave ships the captain and supercargo often conspired to abandon some of the crew, in order to increase the share of the profits for those who remained. The Perkins family had little problem with the morality or lack of morality of the trade, as its previous business was the slave and sugar trade in Santo Domingo. In 1792 a slave insurrection in that country ruined the Perkins' business, so James and Thomas formed a new partnership as J. and Th. Perkins. It did not take more than one successful voyage to become wealthy, and the many successful Perkins voyages made Thomas both wealthy and powerful. For the crew who travelled on a Perkins ship, life was not as comfortable or as lucrative. In 1814 Charles Ting was a 13-year-old who had run away from school. Colonel Thomas Perkins, who received his title by serving in the Massachusetts militia, took the boy aboard a China-bound ship. Thomas's brother had married the boy's aunt. If the 4'8" teenager had expected any benefits from being related to the wealthy ship owner, he soon found out the opposite was true. His uncle John Higginson was supercargo aboard the ship, and that the Opium Brotherhood 249 first words young Charles heard from him were instructions to the carpenter to beat the boy. Ting was beaten daily for minor infractions, for not knowing his way about the ship, and for the amusement of those in charge. He was thrown in the hog pen as punishment. Ting was even denied adequate clothing for the passage around Cape Horn, and he was handed over to 3 unusually obese women, wives of a Hawaiian king, for their sexual amusement. Charles Ting survived his brief stint working for his uncles, and after being twice cheated by them later, he left their employ. Ting left his memoirs preserving the tales of the opium trade, and of the Perkins' role. 7 The other men aboard the Perkins' ship fared better, but the ship was under-provisioned, and ran out of food on the way to Canton.